Good afternoon and welcome to the third in our Oxford Farming Conference Bitesize series. I am Sally Williams, the Chairman of Oxford 2021. Oxford Farming Conference's strapline is Inform, Challenge and Inspire. As a result, OFC itself doesn't seek a position one way or another, but to inform you of the wider perspectives and policies, challenge you to ask the difficult questions of yourself and your business, and inspire you to drive forward and make changes where you have deemed fit. UK Ag PLC is a diverse being, and it is for you to decide what is appropriate for your own business. Our bite-sized series are all registered for CPD points, so if you're looking for Basis or Dairy Pro or anything else, please get in contact with our Secretariat or look on the relevant websites. Oxford Farming Conference has developed and grown over the 75 years, and right now we are all adapting to that dreadful phrase, the new normal, and finding ways to come through these testing times as unscathed as we can. For me, this period has highlighted that being human means we need connection, and once a connection is made, it is generally heartbroken. Every year, conference feedback highlights the importance of these connections. By going digital, we accept that those physical connections are harder to make, but we are learning as we go, and this month we have introduced a chat function below the screen to allow you to share points and discussions amongst yourselves as participants and build connections. Most of the connections are amongst delegates at conference, but as directors, it is our great privilege to meet our fabulous speakers face to face. I was lucky enough to spend time with Kamal Mouzawak during the conference in January, and my thoughts are with him and indeed all of those in Beirut and Lebanon. Kamal was achieving incredible things with his farmers market and other initiatives in a country facing many challenges. He was building bridges and joining communities through the power of food. When you have met someone, their suffering is all the more acutely felt. It is no longer an abstract concept in a faraway land. And it does make our own current struggles pale slightly into insignificance. Kamal's big message was that one person can make a difference. Be the change you want to see. So I would implore all of you, if you have any idea or ability to help what is going on in Lebanon and anywhere else where you see struggles, please be the change you want to see. I will now hand over to Tom to introduce us to the case for expansion. And I think it's very apt that on a day where we are all hashtagging Farm24, that we are on a farm. Over to Tom.
Good afternoon and welcome to Grosvenor Farms. We've put our boots on for this month's Oxford Farming Conference Bitesize to take on the theme of the conference from 1966, the case for expansion. Farming was on the up in 1966, just like the England football team. The Beatles had played their last live concert in the UK, and Paul McCartney had bought a farm in Campbelltown, Scotland. While optimism in UK farming might be in short supply today, the case for expansion continues. Grosvenor Farms is a 2,000-hectare dairy and arable business just outside Chester, and Tesco's biggest single supplier of milk. The dairy farm here has seen a substantial expansion over the past decade and plans to continue that growth over the next 12 months. We're now going to hear from Managing Director Mark Roach and Arable Manager Charlie Steer about the farm setup here, their optimism for the future, and why they feel bigger is better in UK farming today. So let's go.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, Tom, thanks to you and the OFC for allowing us to participate in this webinar today, and for us to tell you our story and share our experiences with you in the context of how our business has expanded. To do that, we're going to do a bit of a double act today. Charlie Steer, our Arable Manager, I'm going to turn to him in a minute, and he's going to give some background to the business to set some context for what we're about to present to you. Then I'll come back and talk about the changes that have taken place over the business and how it's grown, particularly over the last 5 years or so, and some of the rationale and thinking behind those changes. And then we'll complete the presentation by going back to Charlie, who's just going to explain how we execute our strategy day to day, and with the objective of delivering lasting commercial, social and environmental benefit. So without any more ado, I'm going to hand over to Charlie, who's going to give you the background.
Thanks very much, Mark. So thank you, everyone. We'll start with a brief introduction into the overarching components of the business. So who we are a commercial farming enterprise on the Eton Estate near Chester in the northwest of England. So we have a mixed farming enterprise here, 2,500 dairy cows and 1,500 dairy heifer replacements. We're producing just over 90,000 litres of fresh milk daily. Most of this is going to Tesco's via Muller. As I said, roughly 6,000 acres of arable and forage cropping, and 11% of the total area is in environmental stewardship. As I mentioned, we're part of the Wheatsheaf Group of companies. So the vision of the business, we want to try and deliver a truly sustainable farming system. So what do we mean by this? We want to use resources as efficiently as possible using the latest technology and know-how. Enforce the highest standards of animal welfare and comfort. We're custodians of the land, properties and the environment in this part of the estate. We also want to foster positive relationships with the communities and our stakeholders. So Mark, I think that's me done. I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Charlie. This is what we see as the great challenge facing farmers at the moment, what we call in our business the triple challenge. How do we feed a growing and more affluent world population with finite resources, whilst at the same time protecting and enhancing the natural environment for future generations? So it's not just about producing more safe, nutritious, high quality food, it's about producing that food in a sustainable way which protects the planet for the future generations. And overriding that is we need to do that with profitable businesses, because ultimately there is no long-term sustainability without profitability. But this is not just, I feel, a challenge. This is also, I think, an opportunity for us, and perhaps even some would say a responsibility for farmers to rise to this challenge. And if I look at where we're sitting today in the macroeconomic environment, and we've seen the global pandemic, which has quite rightly taken all the headlines recently, we are about to face change, which I've not seen in my lifetime in the agriculture industry. I've been involved in the industry for over 40 years, and throughout that period, agricultural policy has been determined by the Common Agricultural Policy coming from Europe, from Brussels. We're about to repatriate that policy as we enact Brexit, and that's going to create huge change and opportunities and threats involved with that. If we get a good Brexit, then I can see our agricultural industry having a really dynamic, viable and resilient future. However, if we get a difficult Brexit, then we could see the opposite. And I suspect that ultimately, the case for expansion and the future size of UK agriculture will be, certainly in the short term, determined by what type of Brexit we have. And I think the key points in this is the trade-in arrangements and the regulatory framework in which we find ourselves once we come out. And at the moment, none of us really know how that's going to unfold, but I'm quite confident that if we get a favourable terms of trade, and if we get a reasonably level playing field in terms of the regulatory environment, that large parts of UK agriculture can rise to the challenge of being globally competitive, of being efficient and productive, producing the safe, healthy, nutritious food that we all want, while simultaneously protecting the natural environment. However, if it goes against us, then I suspect that life could be very difficult. And I still think there are people in certain quarters of government and maybe elsewhere who think that agriculture is an inefficient industry reliant on subsidies and therefore a drain on the public purse. However, I feel that if we can get the framework around us right through this next phase, I'm pretty confident that agriculture can be a force for good, can be a force for good for UK PLC. I think that we can increase our market share both domestically and perhaps more further ahead internationally. And if we can do that, then we can create wealth, we can create employment, we can be therefore pay more taxes, reduce the balance of payments, deficit on food, and become more food sufficient and have greater food security. And I think that's the opportunity that lies ahead. And I think the NFU and others are quite right to focus on production standards and ensuring that we have a reasonably level playing field going forward. And I think a good example of an industry that's made this, or a country that's industry has made this work very well, is the Irish dairy industry, which in 2015, when milk quotas were abolished, the Irish dairy industry since then has doubled its milk output. And it's done that whilst at the same time delivering a higher real price to its dairy farmers. And all that extra milk has been exported. It's a real success story. And you go to Ireland and see how they do it and see how all the stakeholders in the chain are aligned. It's very, very impressive, from the government at the top down through the retailers to the processors, the farmers, and all the sport industries as well, from the supply trade to research, knowledge extension, teaching, etc. All impressively aligned to create a really strong industry which creates a lot of wealth and employment for Ireland and its people. And I think if we can get this next phase right, I hope that that's the sort of trade and commercial environment that we'll find ourselves in post-Brexit. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So just to run through the journey that we've been on over the last 20 years or so. I arrived at Grosvenor here in 1998. And back then, we were an arable farm with dairy. We were growing over 1,000 acres of potatoes. Potatoes were the main driver of the business. We had quite a large number of cows back then, about 800, but they were dispersed in 7 herds, so it didn't really generate the economies of scale on dairy and that we'd like to see. But it became very quickly obvious to me at first review of the business after arriving that no matter what we did with our arable farm here, we would never be able to become a world-class arable farmer. Our soil types are not right. We've got difficult, challenging clays, field structures, infrastructure here for arable farming, climate, etc., was all working against us. However, when I looked at our dairy, it also became obvious that if we got our dairy farming right, we could become world-class dairy farmers. And that's the route that we embarked on 20-ish years ago. Potatoes were reduced and then removed altogether. And we concentrated on dairy farming with combinable crops from 2000 up to 2010. And in amongst that time, we diversified the business, introduced bovine genetics business Cogent, which grew very quickly and successfully, and in effect outgrew the business, outgrew the farming business. So we separated Cogent from the farm in 2003, and Cogent's now gone on to great success. It's part of the ST Genetics business based in Texas, and of course has pioneered the commercialization of sex semen technology, which is one of the big technological shifts in animal breeding over the last 20 years or so. So the farm carried on. We sweated out dairy assets for 10 years or so, up to around 2010, 2012. We consolidated into 4 herds of 1,400 cows, and we sweated those assets. And we grew our cereal acreage to replace the land that's now wasn't growing potatoes. And we had a very, very successful business through that phase. Although it became clear to us that whilst our dairies were functional and were workable, they were nowhere near best in class. And that if we were going to stay in dairy farming, then we needed to make some decisions. We needed to make some investments, because these old units were coming towards the end of their natural lifetime. If If you just put the next slide up, please. So we had, as I say, these 4 dairy units. They were all functional. None of them were suitable for expansion. So we in effect came to a crossroads, and we asked ourselves with our boards the very sort of fundamental questions. Firstly, is dairy farming a good business to be in? So we decided that the world market was growing 3% per annum compound, so we ticked that box. The next question was, is UK a good place to be dairying, as we could have invested and built a new dairy elsewhere in the world? And we thought, yeah, the UK has a fantastic natural climate for dairying, a comparative advantage, if you like, over many other parts of the world. So I've got a lot of people on a relatively small island, a lot of mouths to feed, and a fairly densely population. So we thought the market was there, the natural conditions were there. So the next question was, is Cheshire a good place to dairy, where we were farming? And yeah, it's in the west of the country. It's in an area with a huge history and heritage of dairy farming. It's well supported by supply industries. And of course, we had our own staff who had gathered a huge amount of expertise in dairy farming. So once we ticked all those boxes, we then turned to the economics. And we came to just to make this investment pay. And in our business, we have a number of financial metrics. One of them is return on capital. We are competing for capital in our group with other parts of the business, and also EBITDA percentage of turnover. And we needed a 10% increase in output and a 10% reduction in fixed costs to justify the consolidation of these 4 dairy farms into one new unit. And we did the numbers. The numbers had it up on paper. We pressed the buttons and off we went. We started building in 2012. And in fact, we've just now, 6 years later, sort of completed all the building work that we've needed to develop the business. And back in 2015, 1,400 cows. We produced around 11,000 litres of cow back then, somewhere around 15 million litres. And today we've moved the business on to 2,500 cows, 12,500 litres. So over 30 million litres. So we more or less doubled our milk output over this period. And I think what was really interesting to us is when we gradually closed the 4 farms and consolidated them onto the one new site at Lea Manor, was how quickly the cows adapted. We were looking for a 10% increase in output, and we very quickly, within months, saw that milk yields went up by more like 15%. And the 10% reduction in fixed costs actually were more like 25-30% reduction. We'd underestimated the cost of running 4 units as opposed to running one large unit, 4 herd managers, 4 milking parlours, 4 sets of kit travelling between the units. We grossly underestimated the fixed cost savings that we were able to generate coming to the new farms. And we think that increase in output was due to just having better facilities, because for a while we were able to compare the new farm in new facilities with some of the older farms as we were gradually closing them down. And the acting improvements in animal health, welfare and comfort were quite startling. We've seen a 60% reduction in antibiotics over this period, and we've got very much the highest standards for health, welfare and comfort metrics in the UK. And I think a point about animal health and welfare, and make this point to non-farming visitors, is that you don't get high performance and good financial results without the highest levels of health, welfare and comfort. I've never seen a sick or unhealthy cow deliver a lot of milk. So those 2 things do go hand in hand. The other thing we've been measuring through this change is our carbon footprint. And we've reduced our carbon footprint by something like 35% through this period, for milk this is. And I think we can, over time, see a route forward to substantially reducing that further and eventually moving towards carbon neutral dairy farming. So minimizing our environmental impact was one of the objectives that we set ourselves when we went down this route. I'm going to stop there and move on to Charlie. Perhaps you can just have the next slide first, Charlie, before we do that. And this is where the business is today. When I arrived here in 1998, we were farming on 28 different sites. We're now farming on 5 different sites. These are specialist sites, so we're able to have a high level of specialization in terms of servicing these sites from a staffing point of view. So the main milking unit at Leah Manor Farm, half a mile to the north of that is Leah Moss's farm, which is our feeding centre. Half a mile to the south of Leah Manor is our dry cow farm and maternity unit where all the dry cows calve. And then about a mile to the west, we have the young stock farm. We have about 1,500 head there. And then as we go up north of that towards the village of Alford, we have our Arable farm, which again integrates with the livestock and is a key part of our sustainability messaging. Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Charlie, who's going to run through this strategy in action and how we execute it on the ground on a day-to-day basis.
So thanks, Mark. It'd take too long to explain all the practical benefits of the expansion, so I'm going to pick out a few key points. Starting with what we see in front of us, we've allowed each unit to specialise, employed lean management. The units have been specifically designed for the role they see in the business. So to pick out Edgeley, which is the unit you can see in the top left of the screen, this is the calving and maternity unit. Below that is the grange where the young stock sit. Now the staffing structure at each of these places allows staff progression, skill development and ownerships of tasks, and crucially structure in the training development of the members of staff, allowing them to be absolutely perfect at the job they do. Edgeley's a great example. The guys there will calve thousands of cows each year, and we've had several students come through there who've really gone away with a huge experience. They've probably calved more cows than they would as a vet student each year. The Grange is similar, a huge attention to detail on building design specifically for young stock rearing, and there's some great results. Very low calf mortality. It's lower than 1.5%. And producing some good quality heifers, both for rearing into the main dairy unit and for sale. The several units we had previously, which Mark talked about, we had a huge duplication of machinery. So centralisation of our forage store at Lee Moss's, which is the photo on the bottom right, has allowed efficiencies that were well beyond the quantities that we budgeted for. Similarly, the Arable unit at Alford Hall serves the dairies as a contracting centre for forage operations, as well as manure spreading. Also, all the combinable crop drying, storage, and any processing that is required, such as rolling barley, is done at Alford Hall. So, personally speaking, as the Arable manager, I've got to pick out some of the biggest benefits of the expansion of the dairy. It's definitely been the utilisation of labour and machinery across the year. Again, it adds diversity to job roles, allowing us to help and retain and engage really good staff. Every day is different, and they're fully employed throughout the year. The other is the increase in total production and reduction in costs, thanks to investment in the manure handling and the treatment of manure as a valuable fertiliser rather than a waste. So the vision of sustainability is to develop a circular farming model. This is sort of demonstrated by the diagram you can see on the screen. So the expansion of the dairy has allowed better use of flood meadows on the tributaries of the River Dee. Up to 30% of the farm area can flood in years such as 2019/20, of which we can expect to see more of, I dread to say, as climate change takes its toll. Cows convert this lower quality forage we produce from the flood meadows into energy and protein dense food. The cows obviously produce a large amount of manure. As I've mentioned, we've expanded the handling facilities to allow us to utilise this. We've also expanded the fleet of machinery to apply in a very timely manner. We can put the right amount on in the right time, in the right place. And this has generated huge savings in fertiliser. For example, we've bought no potassium or phosphorus fertiliser since the dairy at Lee Manor opened. Additionally, this has saved £82,000 in nitrogen fertiliser costs alone, and an estimate another 100k in potassium and phosphorus and sulphur fertilisers. A headline figure being that 83% of our forage crops were grown using organic manure alone in the year ending December 2019. This is how the organic manure has vastly helped reduce the carbon footprint of every kilo of milk produced by 30% since we expanded the dairy unit, along with other factors such as the increase in milk yield at the new dairy and reduction in purchased protein. The expansion of the dairies allowed us to look at the farm with fresh eyes and to develop additional sustainability features. Apart from the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, we've built in solar arrays onto the dairies, so we're reducing our electricity consumption. We're carbon footprinting to calculate exactly how much saving we're making in greenhouse gas emissions. Our soil health is increasing. As I just previously mentioned, we're using manure to increase our soil carbon and organic matter levels, which is currently double the UK average. This is from NRM's soil survey data. The fresh eyes I was talking about has allowed us to enter into a new countryside stewardship scheme, which has included the planting of 100,000 trees on less productive farmland. 24,000 hedge plants have been established in the last 3 years, to increase the farm total to 136 miles. We've also increased the biodiversity on the farm and restored features such as ponds and marl pits, which are unique to this area of Cheshire. Some of the 113 we have on the farm have been restored and have seen a huge benefit to wildlife. Again, we've monitored this using Natural England and the University College London. So to summarise the benefits of our expansion we've been lucky enough to undertake, it's allowed us to develop what we consider a world-class farming system, providing safe, healthy, nutritious food, which in the current economic climate, the affordability of which is crucial. We've done that using resource-efficient farming techniques, upholding the best in animal and staff welfare, reduced our carbon footprint, and improved soil, air, water and biodiversity, crucially, while turning a profit. Thanks very much. I think we're going to go on and take questions now, so I'll let Tom carry on and explain how that's going to work.
Charlie, that was great, and thank you, Mark, as well. I'm now with you just across from you in the farm office. So we've got a question and answer session now. We've got about 30 minutes, and we've already had lots of questions, so I'll get straight to them. If you haven't worked out already, on the web page there are 2 tabs, one a chat function and one a Q&A. So use the question one, the Q&A one, to pose a question. Like I said, we've got 30 minutes, so we'll get through as many as we can. Mark, let me start with a question that came up from your talk, and it's about the adaptation of this business. Could this farm business adapt if your milk buyer changed its policy and required, say, cows to be grazed 120 days a year? Because you appear to have bet against that happening.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Tom. And grazing or not grazing is something we do look at quite regularly in our business. A couple of points about it. We have actually got a contingency plan in place should we be required to graze our cows. Luckily, the unit is in the middle of quite a large landmass, so we've got quite a lot of land around the dairy which we could set up tracks for various groups to go out if we need to do it. But just, I'd like to make 2 points on that. If we had to do that, it would increase our cost of production. It would increase our carbon footprint. It would reduce our productivity and our competitiveness. And I think it would reduce our animal welfare as well, given the type of cow we got, the type of facilities that we have for housed animals, and the challenge of grazing them on the scale we have on our heavy clay soils. I think we would lower those metrics. So I think for our farm, in our system, what we're doing with housed all year round suits us, it suits the cows, it suits our staff. Hopefully it suits the milk buyers as well. But yeah, it's we are aware that that is one of the threats to the current way we produce milk, is that if we are still forced to graze, then we'll need to adapt to that. But we'll do an economic calculation. So if it's in our interest to review where we sell our milk because we're forced to graze with one particular buyer, then we'll do an economic calculation and work that through.
One of the questions we got sent through was, and you kind of touched on there, it was how has expansion affected cow welfare and how do you measure it?
Yeah, we've seen a significant step up in all our animal health welfare metrics. So we're measuring, fertility, for example. We have pregnancy rates now touching 30%, which is substantially higher than the 20% we had before we consolidated these units. In terms of mastitis rates are now below 10%, clinical mastitis rates. We don't use antibiotics any longer for dry cows. In terms of all the transition metrics such as DAs, milk fevers, retained placentas, etc., now all at very, very low levels. Locomotion scores for lameness, at the top of the industry. And I think it's down to the fact that we're lucky enough to have the opportunity to build a brand new dairy unit on a greenfield site. And we put a huge amount of research into how we were going to build that farm. We saw farms right across Europe, USA. We saw very good farms, we saw less good farms, and we hoovered up a huge amount of intellectual property. And the key question we asked ourselves as we were planning to build the farm is what about the cow? Is that good? What's best for the cows ultimately is best for the staff and it's best for the business. So fundamental sort of principle of designing our new farm was based on what's best for the cow. And we kept asking ourselves that question through the build. So things like ventilation, cubicle design, passage width, feed space, milking speed, group size. It's a whole host of marginal factors which, when you put them together, make something big. And that was the sort of principle behind what we do. And I said earlier, and I'd like to re-emphasize this, you do not get high performance without high standards of animal health, welfare and comfort. The two go together hand in hand.
A bigger picture question. You said farming can be a contributor and not a drain on the public finances. Would that apply to all types and sizes of farm businesses? And what about hill farming, for example? Would that continue, in your view, to need subsidy support in the future?
Yeah, I think, we're talking mainly as a dairy farmer. And I think if I look at, firstly, the UK dairy industry, we have a huge natural comparative advantage for milk production in large parts of the UK, to use Ricardian comparative advantage economic principles. There are very few places in the world that are better suited, I feel, to milk production than the UK. So perhaps Ireland, New Zealand are two obvious examples. But it's never really too hot in the UK. It's never really too cold. We don't get monsoons. I'm a partner in a dairy farm in South Dakota. There we can have plus 40 in the summer. We can have minus 40 in the winter. So you have to design a setup with the added costs of dealing with those extremes of temperatures, for example. So UK dairy, in the right regulatory framework and with the right or a favourable trade-in arrangement, I feel can be globally competitive going forward. If you look at the rest of bovine, similar, I think, applies. We do here have a natural advantage, I think, for beef and sheep meat production. And there's other parts of UK ag, I'm sure, that could also be globally competitive. But we do need to have a reasonably level playing field. And the whole debate on production standards is quite important in this context. And there'll be parts of the country which will perhaps need a little bit more help. Hill farming, I think, will need some subsidy to continue. But large parts of UK ag, I think, can be globally competitive in the right regulatory trade-in framework.
And just a scale question, what, in your view, is the future for smaller scale dairy, kind of 120 cows or less?
You know, all farms, dairy farms, have been getting bigger over the years. You know, the average herd size 50 years ago was what, 40, 50 cows. It's now, I think, 140-ish or so. So farms, I think, gradually will get bigger. But I think it's more a case of how well you manage your farm rather than the scale of the farm. I think there'll be, you know, opportunities for all sizes of farms. You know, smaller farms can adapt more quickly, engage more family labor. So I think all sizes of farms, if they are very well managed, will, you know, have the opportunity to, you know, thrive going forward. But it is down to, you know, it will be a competitive environment, and we'll need to be good at what we do to develop our businesses.
Sally, you're a dairy farmer yourself. Have you got thoughts on the presentation that you'd like to make?
Yep. So with my two hats on, thank you first and foremost to you both for excellent presentation. And yes, as a dairy farmer, considerably smaller than you are operating, we have 360 cows at home. I think there are still lessons to be learned, though, in terms of, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. You have the scale that you've been able to expand and make the efficiencies and the benefits from scale for cooperation and collaboration across smaller producers to try and get some of the benefits. I mean, you specifically spoke about you were expecting a 10% reduction in fixed costs, but you hit the 25-30%. Do you think there are lessons that can be learned from the smaller producers? The question coming through is quite dominated by smaller producers asking that, is the future only for operations of your size? You've addressed it slightly already, Mark, but what role is there in collaboration and cooperation to play to allow smaller people potentially to have some of the benefits that you have achieved on your own?
Yeah, I think that's right. Collaboration, perhaps, is the right word to use here. You know, we are large enough to have our own kit, our own equipment. We're fully mechanized, and we can do most of our work ourselves. But you know, in a smaller business, there's, you know, opportunities to subcontract. Some of, you know, forage making is an example, of muck spreading, and some of the other, you know, capital intensive parts of the operation. So I think there are different ways to farm, and you know, on a smaller scale, it'd be a slightly different approach to what we do here. But you know, I see well-run smaller farms with the right management, you know, have as much chance of thriving going forward as some of the larger farms like ours.
And obviously you referenced Ireland earlier on, and their increase in production, doubled output post the removal of quotas. And you touched on that connection through their supply chain. What do you see being needed in the UK? And I'll give Scotland as an example. So we have also increased production quite dramatically since the ending of quotas. The Scottish government made it something that they were very keen on, seeing this growth and this expansion. But unfortunately, in the Scottish case, the entire supply chain wasn't necessarily on board with that. And as a result, we've seen a compression of our prices through various different means. So what, from your perspective, would allow us to match and even exceed the Irish example that you gave earlier on?
And just before you, we had a question, I think, from Phil Christopher that was quite similar. He said, will expansion of supply result in lower farm prices, particularly if the commodity in question can be imported, say from Ireland?
Yeah, good point. Quite interesting for anyone who's been over to Ireland to see how well the industry works and how all the stakeholders right through that chain seem to be aligned together. Interesting about Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England have all got devolved agricultural policies. And in some ways, you look at us repatriating agricultural policy from Brussels, the common agricultural policy. There's a possibility here that the four parts of the United Kingdom could have a totally different fragmented agricultural policy, and I think that would be to the detriment of the industry in terms of it growing its share of markets going forward. But I think the key point here, and if we have a supply only expansion from the bottom without the rest of the chain actually getting engaged with growing the industry, then this is what will happen. So we do need all parts of the industry to work together. I'm not saying we need a corporate government sort of Marshall type plan to do that, but I think we do need to have some sort of vision and coordinated approach across the industry. And if we can do that, I think we can displace imports, we can grow our export markets, and we can be a force for good for UK PLC.
And Mark, do you know what impact a no-deal Brexit or a free trade deal with the US would have on this farm business?
We've sort of looked at worst case scenarios here in some of the modeling that we've done. And I think we're fortunate in the dairy industry that we are not self-sufficient in milk and milk products. Milk is a commodity that's fresh milk, which is the market we're in, is not a commodity that can be easily transported. Quite expensive to move milk across Europe and into the UK across the seas. So we do have a degree of protection in that sense in terms of dairy. But if we do get a very unfavorable trade deal and a difficult regulatory environment following Brexit, then that will put severe pressure, I think, on UK ag, and would be the nightmare scenario, I think, for our industry. If we are asked to compete on global markets with two hands tied behind our backs, with food of any standard coming into the UK, then that would be very difficult for all of us.
Charlie, a question for you. So from Jeremy Higgs, he says, could Charlie comment on the cost of production for arable and dairy outputs this year, and how does this compare to the prices you achieve both now and prior to the evolution of the business?
Yeah, so good question. Each year we conduct a cost of production for each crop, and pre 2014 we were quite sort of chemical intense, if you like, buying a lot of purchased inputs, P&K, as well as more herbicides. Since then, as I said, we've taken a sort of a larger view of the business. We've expanded the rotation out. We've included more inclusion of organic manure by investing in systems that allow us to do that. Quite lucky that we inherited quite a lot of infrastructure from potato growing days. That means we can pump liquid or organic manure out. So to sort of answer the question with some figures directly, obviously 2020 harvest still underway, but for 2019 harvest, we were looking at wheat around the £95 per tonne cost of production. That's not including rent or finance. I'm just trying to pluck figures. Or winter barley was mid 70s, and oilseed rape was low 200s from memory. In contrast to pre 2014 levels, I think our costs were approximately 25% higher than they are now. Obviously, delivering a lot of benefits with soil health improvements, as mentioned in the presentation. Our soil organic matters on the rise consistently, which we're targeting, and obviously we sort of well versed in the benefits this brings to a mixed farming system.
And on those points, you talked about the tree planting, nutrient recycling, reductions in artificial fertilizer, and, as you say, increase in soil carbon. Is scale critical to making that happen? Do you need to have the scale of farm that you have and the expansion you've made to do those things?
Yeah, I think Mark's made the point quite nicely. I think it's the level of management, and any farm can implement the things that we've done. I feel everything we've done is scalable, whether it be manure handling, rotation expansion, countryside stewardship. And just to pick up some of the points you made on that, we've got approximately 11% of the farm area in countryside stewardship. But what we've done in there is analyse where we can put these measures in that benefit the environment. We're on the River Dee, so it's a huge number of people take their drinking water from a stretch of water that's on the farm. So we use yield mapping, weather data, crop failure costs, and we did partial budgets to establish where best to put these implementations in. And as I say, that the measures that any farm can put into place with relative ease.
I think this is probably a question for both of you, but it follows on from that one. Someone called James had said, it seems that the new ag policy will seek to reward farmers based on payment for public goods. Which metric have you developed that you would like to see part of that? You would like to see a part of that, sorry.
Yeah, it's something that we sort of ponder ourselves quite a lot. And personally speaking, I think it's the things that we can have the biggest influence on. So carbon is one of the things. We've started by looking at our carbon budget where before we expanded the dairy, so retrospectively. We've then gone into a budget which involved looking at the changes we'd made since the opening of the dairy unit. And as I said, we made around the 30% reduction in emissions. We've then gone on to budget our carbon going forward. So as well as financial budgets for 2020, we've also set a carbon budget. So I think farmers should be rewarded for reduction in carbon, and then you take it another level and look at sequestration on farm, so that you're tree planting, you're increasing biomass. Soil carbon, I don't believe is recognised as a sink at the moment, but we feel that it should be. So all those measures delivering not only reduction in emissions, they're also sequestration, and as well as the quality benefits for the surrounding area. Biodiversity we measure, we undertake bird surveys, invertebrate surveys, we measure the length of hedgerow, we establish how good a quality the hedgerows are, and these are all things that can be built in and do deliver a good benefit to the public. And again, I think it needs to be all dovetailed together into a sort of farming system that works for UK ag, but it's definitely something we can work on.
And this is a follow-up. Hugh asked, what is the route to net zero for the dairy herd, and how are you measuring it?
Yeah, we do a full carbon. We do obviously a financial budget, and we monitor that annually, as well as doing 3 and 5 year plans for the business. We do exactly the same for carbon. So we have a budget for carbon for the farm. We've been tracking that since 2014. And at the moment, our carbon footprint from milk is about 0.85, I think it is, kilos carbon CO2 equivalent per litre of milk. And that's based on the GWP method of assessing carbon. I think there's still some work to do and for us to agree how best to measure carbon, particularly methane, which is a relatively short-lived gas in the atmosphere. If we take the Oxford University GWP star method of assessing carbon, then that virtually halves our carbon footprint from 0.8 something to 0.4 something. And that's then before we take account of sequestration and further developments in the use of renewable energy and productivity gains. So I think we can see a route down to carbon zero, and that's something we'll be working to over time.
Another question here: do you see farming's future as a high-tech one, one based on agroecological practices or low carbon farming?
I'd like to think that we could have all three, Tom. I think again, looking at areas of the farm where you can implement different methods, we're trying to use the best in technology here. So whether it be lameness detection in the parlour, yield mapping, we're looking into some real-time soil sampling technology. The agroecological side, we have a lot of wetland that I've mentioned on the River Dee. We've reverted this back to a grassland with 13 different species of grass and wildflower, but it's still delivering production for the dairy. And then sort of on the intensity side of it, we've developed a system where we can make the best of our best performing resources and make sure that the implementations for stewardship and biodiversity and such like are put on areas of the farm that aren't quite as, or don't have quite the potential for production that the rest of the farm does.
I've got a follow-up, I think, from someone to that grazing question I asked you first, Mark. And Amy asked, do Mark and Charlie think the very impressive sustainability gains made and the benefits they offer society can ever overcome the resistance from those who insist, irrespective of all else, cows must graze?
Yeah, I do. I think we've got to tell our story, and all farming systems have their advantages and disadvantages. And I think we need a much more honest debate and discussion across the industry and externally on different farming systems. Where grazing systems, house systems, all systems, have their good points and they have their bad points. And I feel we need a much more rational debate about these issues rather than the somewhat emotional debates that we have at the moment. I don't know if Charlie wants to add to that.
Colin asks, without outside investment and bank support, would this business have been viable? And I presume he also means the expansion as well.
Yeah, I think it would. We're a commercial business. I said early on in my presentation that there is no long-term sustainability without profitability. If we don't make a profit, then we can't do all the other good things that we want to do in terms of environmental management and some of our social objectives that we have. So yeah, we've budgeted out on creating a minimum 10% return on capital. We've comfortably achieved that in recent years. And we borrow money internally within our group in a very similar way to what we would borrow it externally with a bank. So we pay interest on our loans in the same way. So yeah, that's all factored into our business plans.
This question is from Martin. He says, does the alternative non-dairy products and the press around methane emissions cause you concern at all for the future of the farm business?
Yeah, I think I am sort of aware and concerned about development of not so much the vegan alternatives, but more about new technology for milk and meat production, laboratory meat, alternative produced meat. I think that's a new technology which has started to gain some traction, and that could be highly disruptive to our industry over the medium long term if that technology really takes off. I think it's got a long way to go, but it's certainly something that we're watching, because that would be highly disruptive to traditional methods of land-based farming.
Does the scale of this farm, does it give you clout with milk buyers in the market, or does it make you more vulnerable because of the amount of milk you have to sell?
I don't think it gives us any more or any less clout with milk buyers, we are quite a large. I suppose we do provide some advantages for a milk buyer in that we can fill 3 full tankers every day. So in terms of moving milk from farm to factory, does increase the efficiency of that process. But in terms of, we've got the same contract as everyone else in the Muller Tesco group. So we don't have any special favors or special advantages.
And what's next for the business? What's next in the next 10, 20 years? Is it more expansion, or are you at the limit for this farm and the space you have?
I think we've just come to the end of 8 years of continuous building and expansion. And we're now at a time of great uncertainty in the industry. So for the next year or two, we will flex our business somewhat. We'll drive some more efficiency through it. We'll look to increase our milk yield through better genetics and better nutrition. And that will provide some growth for us at very low risk and no or low capital expenditure. And then we'll see how the industry settles down post-Brexit. What sort of framework will we be operating in? And we'll assess as we go. Over the longer term, the integration of dairy and arable here, alongside the environmental use of land that we've got, is a very good fit for this business. So I think if we're going to expand beyond that, then I think we would probably be looking elsewhere.
We've just got time maybe for a couple more questions, so please get them in right away. What someone's put here, Kendra, says, what have Grosvenor Farms done to tell their story to the public and the local community?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, so we've recently ventured into social media, which is for us was quite a big step. Obviously, there's sensitivities around this being the family home of the Duke of Westminster and such like. And to be fair, that's been well received. We're sort of trying to post on there fairly regularly and keep people updated as to what's going on the farm. In terms of locally, we've shown an incredible amount of people, not just farming interested, but also from the general public around the farm. I think within the first 18 months of opening, we've shown 3,000 people around. This is including everyone from the WI, wildlife trusts, parish councils. So from a sort of face-to-face point, we've been very busy promoting our story and trying to explain the good benefits of not only this farm, but sort of the UK dairy industry as a whole. In terms of taking it further, more social media and such like, I think we're taking baby steps and just making sure that we're comfortable before we go too far.
Just to add on to that, I think this is an important question. We are keen to tell our story and to tell farming story. We also work with the Country Trust, and we get parties of inner city school children out to the farm, well, pre-COVID almost on a fortnightly basis, and we think that's a very good way of telling the story to younger people. And we're looking to work with local schools to get teenagers out to the farm as well. We're also very keen to engage with policymakers and influencers within the industry. We've invited Henry Dimbleby to the farm. We invited Michael Gove, and now with George Eustace. So if they're listening, we'd be very keen to host you here and show you, how we go about our business, how we produce food and look after the environment, and run a very sustainable farming system. So we're very, very keen to tell our story. So yeah, thanks for the question. That's a very good question to ask.
Thank you. That's bang on 1 o'clock on my time. So thank you so much for your time, both today and previously when we were chatting. That was brilliant. I'm going to hand back to Sally to tell us about the next bite size as well. So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Charlie. Over to you, Sally.
Thank you much to everybody. Thank you. I managed to unmute, but I haven't actually got my words lined up. Thank you very much to Tom, to Mark, and to Charlie. I'm completely biased being a dairy farmer, but that was absolutely fascinating. And thank you generously. While I'm wrapping up, I would like to invite the scholars to please log on now for the live lounge. You will be held in the waiting room until our Hawk AV let you in. Don't panic, you will be let in, but if you could log on now, and then you'll be ready for the question and answer behind the scenes as soon as we're done. I've already mentioned Hawk just now, but I have to say a huge thank you to Hawk, who run our AV. This month has seen quite a number of challenges on the connectivity front, not least my own laptop and my own video cutting in and out during this, but in the run up to it, Hawk have been absolutely brilliant at supporting us and allowing us to present today. Next month, the webinar is entitled The World, It's Food and My Farm. It's going to be chaired by fellow director Barbara Bray, and we're delighted to be welcoming the UK ambassador to the UN's Food and Agricultural Agencies in Rome, is Terry Sarch, the president of Emerging Ag, Robin Anderson, and the chief executive of LEAF, who is no stranger to Oxford Farming Conference, Caroline Drummond. Thank you very much for all of your participation, your chat, your questions, and for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you.